Integrity are Claudette's way of life. Join Claudette in the next hour and be part of the Claudette Show. Authentically yours, Claudette Schmidt.
Good morning, friends. Happy Monday. Happy Monday, everyone. Today is May 15th, 2023. Thank you for all joining me this morning. I'm here live in the studio. You're listening to me on WSMN 1590 AM and WSMN 95.3 FM. Also streaming live on WSMN.live and on Facebook. I can see myself. Okay, I got to sit straight. I'm just looking at myself. There we go. Okay, don't know where the cameras are. I hope everyone had a great weekend. And for all you moms, I hope you had a nice Mother's Day with loved ones. I myself had a great day outside, gardening, weeding. Very, very therapeutic for me. I enjoy it so much. It's been a long time since I have, we're adjusting a microphone right here, since I have gardened, and I haven't taken an interest in gardening in many, many years. My mother-in-law gave me actually the courage to start gardening, and I was honestly blessed with a mother-in-law who taught me so much about gardening, and she knew everything about gardening. And if a plant didn't grow as it was expected to grow, wasn't a big deal. It was all an experiment. And I have her on my heart so often. I miss her dearly. She passed away last September. And grief is funny, right? Grief hits you in waves. And I didn't realize how much I was still grieving her. But every time I go outside and I'm weeding or planting, I think about her with gratitude, and what a blessing it was that she was my mother-in-law for what feels like such a short period in my life. So that I just wanted to share something with all of you, and that was that Lorene, who was my mother-in-law, she, I was so nervous about gardening because everybody's gardens look so pretty and lovely, and, what if I did it wrong and blah, blah, blah. I just want to pass some of that encouragement around to anyone who's listening today. If someone is hesitant to do something, and if I can encourage you, something new, just try it. Who cares, right? Just try it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's all an experiment here in this thing that we call life on this earth for now. And just don't be afraid. I would like to encourage anyone who needed to hear that. So, with that said, we're going to shift gears a little bit today. I just had a little nostalgic memory. I do have a guest in the studio today. His name is Ian Hewitt, and he joins us from Cornerstone Action and Cornerstone Policy. Ian is the head of litigation for Cornerstone. Briefly, Cornerstone Action and Cornerstone Policy, they are a nonprofit Christian advocacy organization made up by staff such as Ian that are caring and passionate individuals who strive to honor God in all that they do. And a little bit about Ian, and I'm going to let him talk some more because he is the smarty pants here. He has a deep expertise in the area of constitutional protections for religion. Aside from being the head of litigation for Cornerstone, Ian is also an accomplished writer and a very busy individual. And we're delighted. Well, I'm delighted, not me. I'm delighted to have him in the studio today. So welcome, Ian.
Well, I'm also delighted to be here, Claudette. So we are delighted. Thank you for having me in your beautiful
we are delighted.
studio. Yeah, what a striking reminder that Nashua is much, much cleaner than downtown Manchester.
Oh my gosh, right? Is that where your office is, Cornerstone's office?
We have a P.O. box in Manchester.
But Concord is where?
For safety reasons, we tend to keep our location
See?
information private. But it's no secret that I do a lot of work in Concord because of the lobbying and policy work that Cornerstone does. So I'm in Concord on a regular basis.
Okay, very good.
You reminded me, I was reading about Anna Jarvis, the founder of Mother's Day, yesterday, and apparently she was very anti-Mother's Day cards. I guess she said that a card is a terrible way to thank the woman who's done more for you than any other human being in the world.
Wow.
So I felt a little convicted, but grateful that I didn't do a card this year.
See, there you go.
Yeah, right.
I know. We try not, we don't really make it a big deal in our house, of course it's, Mom, well, what do you want to do today? And it's like, okay, well, I kind of just want to garden and, not make sandwiches, and Dad can kind of take over and do that, But every day, we just try to celebrate every day, loving each other every day.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I did do a present, so
okay.
Hopefully
Listen.
the ghost of Anna Jarvis isn't too offended. No.
You're going to show me up now. Well, great. So you practice, you're the head of litigation for Cornerstone. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about what that means and what like the daily rundown might look for you like in a day?
My days are incredibly variable. And my schedule is incredibly variable depending upon, how much stuff we have going on at any given one time, but it's typically a lot. To my knowledge, I'll go further than that and say, just as a matter of fact, I'm the only full-time constitutional or advocacy attorney working for any kind of nonprofit in the state of New Hampshire who is not politically progressive.
Wow.
There's a panoply of a dozen groups you can go to that are nonprofits full-time in New Hampshire if you want to do policy lobbying. If you want to do litigation, you can go to the ACLU, you can go to GLAD. But Cornerstone is really the only game in town if you want. Now, there's other wonderful right of center attorneys who are experienced constitutional litigators at law firms who you can go and hire.
Okay.
But in terms of the left has numerous nonprofits funded principally by out-of-state donors, and our donors in New Hampshire have created this one full-time advocacy organization to litigate constitutional issues on behalf of churches, to litigate free speech cases, and also to do policy advocacy.
Now, that's super interesting, what you just said. And if maybe you could expound a little bit more on that, how there are certain attorneys that practice, and I may have understood it wrong, constitutional law, but they're funded by out-of-state donors?
Well, that's our supposition.
Okay.
I mean, when you see, for example, after New Hampshire became the first state in the country to go from unlimited abortion up to birth to passing late-term abortion prohibition, clearly, this is not in dispute, $6 million were spent on advertising, attacking the new law. I mean, that was not within the midterm, elections. That was just within the few months after we passed our law. So this was over a purely state statutory issue. Millions of dollars were dumped into the state from somewhere.
I didn't realize it was that high, $6 million.
And there's nothing, for sure, there's nothing remotely comparable to that happening in kind of the right-wing political world. There's no donors that are giving anyone $6 million. So all of the evidence that we have suggests that, these are principally, and a lot of them are out-of-state organizations, and it's no secret that these are branches of out-of-state organizations. They're taking their marching orders from an out-of-state national organization. Everyone knows Planned Parenthood's a national organization. They do a lot of advocacy. Cornerstone is an independent, New Hampshire-specific organization. We're affiliated and work with organizations in other states, and we try to work with national organizations where appropriate, but we never, take any direction from national organizations. We decide, what to do in terms of litigation and advocacy based on the circumstances in New Hampshire law, the needs of New Hampshire.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you guys do great work, and you're right in it in the battle all the time, right up there in the State House. Yes. So how many years have you been with Cornerstone?
Been at Cornerstone for over a couple of years now.
Okay. Very nice.
My background before that is in general civil litigation.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about that.
And I've done all kinds of civil litigation, contractual litigation, litigation involving businesses, white-collar criminal work, administrative litigation. And I expected to be able to do that probably for, a long time, many years before I was able to actually do any constitutional work.
Okay.
And then I thought, maybe when I'm a partner at a law firm or something, I'll just get to do some constitutional stuff pro bono or something like that. But because of Cornerstone and Cornerstone's amazing network of supporters, I was able to go into a position where now I'm 5 years out of law school. I just had my 5-year law school reunion.
So great.
And do constitutional litigation. And yeah, I certainly didn't expect to be in this position 5 years after I graduated.
Oh, that's amazing. I love hearing that. That's amazing. So tell me, what drives you? What is it about constitutional law that you enjoy? Or I'm going to let you have the floor here and pick how you would like to start. We could talk, I'm sure, forever about all of this. It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of directions I could go in there, but I would say I love the American system of judicial independence. I mean, I love the adversarial process in general in the legal system, but I love how the law has its own culture and way of deciding things that can be much less affected by politics than I think many people believe. I'm cynical about government officials. I'm cynical about anyone in a position of power. I think we're right to assume the worst of them and be suspicious of them. But sometimes when people say to me, the entire legal system, it's all political, it's just an extension of politics. A powerful illustration of why, that's not necessarily the case is take, an oral argument I remember being really impactful upon me in law school was the oral argument in the case of, it was Snyder against Phelps. And this was the case of the Westboro Baptist Church.
Okay.
Who sounds like you know about them. Probably most of the listeners do as well. They were litigating for their First Amendment rights to be, offensive and obscene and outrageous at the funeral of a soldier. And despite this being a very emotionally charged case, and despite these people being, as offensive as you can possibly imagine to just contemporary Western sensibilities, this organization, this church or cult or whatever you want to call it, was able to send their own attorney with their beliefs, who's a member of their church, to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they just argued about the law. They just argued about the law, and the justices treated her the same way they would treat any other attorney. Justice Stephen Breyer, who is now retired, who's very liberal, would ask her the same questions he would ask any other attorney. He said, I'm curious to know what you think about this constitutional issue. What about this hypothetical? How would this test play out in this free speech case? And it was adversarial in the best possible way. It was a battle of wits facilitated by reason, based on the law. And that would just never happen. And I mean, imagine if she were to go and testify before Congress. There would be no productive conversation. Everyone would be tripping over each other to get a clip for their donor videos. And it's just a completely different culture. And I love how our separation of powers and our system of judicial independence has created the kind of world where that sort of thing is possible.
Now, remind me, how many years ago was that, the Westboro? I
think it was in the mid-aughts, this case, maybe, late, before 2010. That would be my guess, but don't quote me on that.
Geez, I feel like it was earlier than that, but maybe not. There's so many things that, have happened. Now, do you feel like that is still the America, now that we're post-COVID, I guess, post-pandemic, you feel like that is the same America that we still have? Or you're speaking more so to the system, which I really appreciate, and I really want to encourage people to appreciate and delve into history and look at these scenarios and situations that have really happened, right? Just really looking for reason, looking for common sense, and looking to abide by the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even the America we had at the time. But I think some of those values they still linger a bit more in the judicial system. It wasn't that long ago that Scalia and Ginsburg were good friends and were going to the opera together. I saw Justice Ginsburg speak at my law school, and she talked a lot about her friendship with Scalia. I mean, that was, I told you I've been practicing for 5 years. That wasn't that long ago.
Wow.
And I mean, still to this day, you take a contentious case like Masterpiece Cake Shop, the case about whether a baker could be forced to participate in a religious. Ultimately the issue was about whether he could be forced to participate in a religious ceremony that violated his Christian convictions. And Justice Kagan, who's very liberal, and Justice Breyer voted with the conservatives in that case. And Justice Kagan has repeatedly voted. Sided with evangelical Christians even in religious liberty litigation. Now, look, it's not all sunshine and roses. I mean, the Supreme Court does stuff I disagree with all the time. But I think the point is, part of what I love about the legal system is you can't find that anywhere else in the American kind of structure of power, decision-making system. It's the legal system suffering from the same problems. But there's some sense in which the legal system's been able to retain some of these values that are being lost in other places.
You're very well spoken, and I think the way that you explain things is very clear, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate that. A lot of people have said that even in just the voting process, I don't know, I ran for a state representative position in the fall. I didn't win, but I had an interview with a neighbor and a friend who owns a local business. I met George, who you met earlier, the radio station owner, one of them, excuse me. And so he said, let's see what happens, and maybe you can, be on radio. So it led me here. So it was all good, and it was fine. And I don't even know where I was going with that. The way that you explain things and just learning about constitutional law. And I had a great mentor who was helping me just understand the process, because I kind of just got thrown in. And he said to me very simply that if it doesn't line up with the Constitution, then it's a no. You have to dig in, you have to read, and sometimes you have to be so particular, right, when you get into amendments and things like that too. What do you feel like is the most challenging piece about it? Do you have any cases you can cite, or just, in terms of like unpacking law, there's so much surface that we see, right? But then when it comes down to the nitty gritty and really digging in and asking those questions, is there something in particular you can speak to about that?
Yeah, I mean, the nitty gritty of constitutional law is case law. That, any particular provision of our federal or state constitution you can think of has a whole body of case law built up around it, and you really don't know the Constitution unless you know the case law.
Okay, good point.
And some people think intuitively, well, I should just be able to look at the Constitution, look at the constitutional provision, and apply it in this kind of colloquial way without any of this legal expertise. But, when you cash that out, you've got to be able to apply the Constitution in a predictable way. The rule of law is based on predictability. Mm-hmm. And because there are so many different kinds of situations where constitutional issues might arise, really the only way to have predictability is to have stare decisis and to have case law. And so anytime, I dig into some new constitutional question for the first time, I learn all of the case law around that topic. On abortion, for example.
Good one. Okay.
I became, and this is astonishing because we may not witness anything like this in the near future, and I certainly hadn't witnessed anything like it in my lifetime or lived through anything like it in my lifetime. I had books, binders full of pages and pages and pages of federal constitutional case law on abortion that had grown out of Roe and Casey. People know about Roe, maybe they know about Planned Parenthood v. Casey. They might not know there was a whole other body of federal constitutional case law around Roe and Casey, deciding how that kind of cashed out in specific ways. And overnight, all of that knowledge that I'd built up became historical knowledge instead of legal knowledge. Now, none of it is law. Now it's all knowledge that I have about history. And nothing like that. That has only happened in American history a few times. Basically with slavery and segregation, where you have a huge body of books of case law that overnight becomes, just historical. But the volume of the case law kind of gives you a sense of I think, the sort of nitty gritty that you're asking about, that you don't really know a constitutional provision as a lawyer unless you know that body of case law.
So then in the example that you used when we first started, do the Supreme Justices, when they hear a case, when it goes before the Supreme Court, obviously that is something that they rely on too, and they're bound by case law?
Right. Well, they're bound by case law as a general rule, and there are particular canons that they consider when they determine whether to overrule established case law, and we saw that in the Dobbs case.
Okay.
Which Dobbs is the case, by the way, so that I'm sure you know this, but so that all your listeners know, Dobbs against Jackson.
Don't give me too much credit. I might not. So go ahead.
Well, Dobbs against Jackson overturned Roe v. Wade, overturned Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
Yes.
And gosh, so many people now, the last several months, I hear referring to the Dobbs v. Jackson case as the Roe v. Wade case. They refer to Dobbs v. Jackson as Roe v. Wade.
Interesting.
I feel like people are doing this just to irritate me at this point. It's driving me so nuts. But Dobbs is the case that overturned all of the prior federal constitutional case law about abortion, going back to Roe.
Interesting. And when I was on the campaign trail knocking on doors, I would, what party are you with? I'm a Republican, and people would say, well, where do you stand on abortion? And I said, well, I'm pro-life, and I hate that pro-life or pro-choice, right? Even though I don't even know why. Pro-life is just common sense. We should all be pro-life. Pro-choice, I feel like, is you're giving people the choice of how to terminate the baby, but you're not giving them the choice about pro-life. Doesn't make sense, but in my head it might. I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly. Anyway, so the big argument on the campaign trail was, well, no, we already have a law in place in the state of New Hampshire for, an abortion ruling that's law. Well, no, because of what's going on and what had happened. It was last May, right? When that had all gone on about a year ago. I believe. That
sounds right. I get the schedule confused because you had the leak, so that kind of blurs the timetable for me.
Was that when the leak was? Was it April, May? Anyway, no, the ruling was in May, right? I think. Anyway, it was 2022,
Maybe.
The spring, sometime. And so then
I've lost all perception of time.
No, same. And with COVID, everything's very blurry for me. So, the big talk was no. I watch the news. I see what's going on. It doesn't really, essentially, to any constituent that would have, I would have represented. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that New Hampshire had a state law. We are so ill-informed, myself included. I was just thrown into this last year. I just threw my hat in the ring and said, why not? And I got quite the education, and that was so valuable to me, just understanding the Constitution better, all of it, right? And that just makes me want to just make history mandatory for people to learn in school, and it's just so powerful.
Right.
It's just so powerful.
People don't know what the law is in New Hampshire, and they certainly didn't during the midterms. And I heard, I don't know what your experience was, but I heard from rep after rep, campaign volunteer after campaign volunteer, that voters in New Hampshire believe that we have some kind of very restrictive abortion law that certainly bans most abortions.
Yes.
And many people in New Hampshire believe that all abortions are banned.
Correct.
In New Hampshire. And this is, all of this came from us passing a 6-month abortion prohibition. It has exceptions for the physical health of the mother, for the life of the mother. It has an exception for if there's no way that the child's going to survive outside of the womb. This law is more permissive of abortion than a law that Massachusetts had until December of 2020. Until December of 2020, Massachusetts had a felony 6-month prohibition on abortion. But what we've seen
is... It kind of shocks me. I didn't know that. Excuse me for interrupting about Massachusetts. Wow. I would think that would be the last place.
Many Democratic states and purple states had 6-month abortion prohibitions all over the country, including New York.
Yes.
Until 2019 to 2020. And then 2019 to 2020, there was a big push by progressive organizations to say, no, it's unlimited abortion until the child's head crowns. And if you don't support that position, you are not a real Democrat and you're not welcome as a legislator in this party. That phase shift happened just recently, 2019 to 2020. And I think in New Hampshire, we faced a twofold problem, which was, one, we had all these progressive organizations just lying and describing our law as some sort of complete ban on abortion or highly restrictive law that banned most abortions. And our civil society is so limited in New Hampshire. There's not enough shows like yours. There's not enough people doing what you're doing. So much of our local media is so unreliable. And I think not even necessarily because of bias, but because they just didn't even have the capacity or the willpower to fact check these claims and clearly explain to people that what we have is a 6-month abortion ban. You're being deceived by these progressive organizations and fake progressive polls. And then at the same time, we had the Republican Party, especially during the midterms, bringing in these failed out-of-state national consultants who have been wrong about every single important decision they've made for a decade, and yet somehow people still keep hiring them. And what were they telling people? They were telling Republicans, don't explain what the law is. If you're explaining, you're losing, quote unquote. And so if you get any questions about abortion, just pivot to the economy. Pivot to the economy. Don't talk about it.
Well, how can you do that?
Right. But the result is that many people went to the polls not knowing what our law in New Hampshire is. And there was a huge missed opportunity here because New Hampshire, certainly not a traditionally pro-life state, but it's a very centrist state. And poll after poll shows that, 60+% of people in New Hampshire support some limits on abortion. Most people are somewhere in the middle. They don't agree with either extreme. They don't agree with a total abortion ban. They don't agree with unrestricted abortion up to birth. They don't like extremists, but only one side framed their opponents as extremists.
That's correct.
The Republican Party could have said, we're not the extremists. The Democrats, all of them, support unrestricted abortion up to birth, even though when you describe our law as a 6-month abortion ban with exceptions, it does not even have majority opposition among Democratic voters in New Hampshire when you tell them what the law is.
Wow.
And yet one side was allowed to completely dominate the conversation and the narrative, and they did that with the complicity of out-of-state Washington, D.C. consultants who dictated to Republicans how to run their campaign and promised a red wave that didn't materialize.
Yeah, no comment. Yeah, it baffled me. It baffled me just trying to explain to people that New Hampshire had this already in place and there was a law. And truthfully, what I didn't say was that it sickened me that it's already at 6 months. That's my personal opinion, but the law is the law, right? So people, I don't know if they wanted to understand or if it was a combination of, I don't know, just a lot of the women that I talked to, I went door to door, as I said, and some of these women, well, how would you like it if you felt, if you were violated or, this had happened and X, Y, and Z, and you'd go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at the end of the day, you can't convince someone to change their mind. But like what you were referring to earlier with case law and with history and just history of this country, even how this all came to learn about Planned Parenthood, to learn about how money, where money flows and where it doesn't flow and why this person has more of a microphone than the next person. That's all valid and important stuff.
Yeah. Well, the answer to that question is simple, which is a 6-month abortion ban. Whether someone agrees with this or not, it gives someone who's a rape victim plenty of time to obtain an abortion.
Absolutely.
So it's a non-issue in New Hampshire. It would still be a non-issue if we had a somewhat more, moderate middle of the road abortion prohibition. And so then the question for that voter is, do you support unrestricted abortion up to birth? Do you support abortion in the 6th, 7th, 8th month? And most New Hampshire voters and even a lot of New Hampshire Democratic voters do not support late-term elective abortion. And yet they elect people who consistently vote 100% of the time for late-term elective abortion.
It just makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. But it's all so maddening. It's all so maddening to me. And I think what I've said to everybody that I've talked to, Democrats alike, people in the middle, extreme liberals, maybe not, but we're a lot more, we all want more of the same thing. We're a lot more alike than we are different in terms of what we want for policy. If we would just sit down for a minute, not stand down, and just put everything aside and just talk through everything with common sense and reason and compare it to the law and even have a chat about history and why this country was founded and how and why it was founded based on those principles, it would all make a lot more sense, but the media, so many people have the microphone in the ear, and it's just so unfortunate. And it's everything. There's just so much more division, sadly.
Right. Well, there's obviously, there's a deep ideological moral war between people that, are centrists even and people that support unlimited abortion up to birth. And that's now the dominant uniform position of Democrats and of progressive organizations in New Hampshire. But I think you're right when it comes to just people on the street in New Hampshire, and poll after poll shows that most people are middle of the road, and even the people voting for these Democrats and giving to these progressive organizations, when you press them for specifics on their position, they don't share these monstrous and extreme positions. The positions are being imposed because of cultural progressivism's domination of these institutions, and also our just incompetence on the right much of the time in forming,
I have to agree with that. Yes.
competing
Yes.
institutions.
Yes. Man, I hope we can change that moving forward. What are you seeing now? What's going on in Concord or any past? I know the Parental Bill of Rights.
There's going to be a House vote on the Parental Bill of Rights.
When is that?
It's scheduled for Thursday.
This Thursday.
This coming Thursday.
Oh, can you speak a little bit about? I'm glad I asked.
Certainly can. Yes.
Yes.
So Senate Bill 272. So
Yes.
contact your representatives and tell them to vote to approve 272
To approve it. Okay.
in the form passed by the Senate. 272. I mean, this is another area where I think the polling is pretty consistently favorable whether you look at New Hampshire or you look at the national issue, and yet the Democrats and all progressive organizations believe that essentially your parental rights stop when you drop a child off at school. And in New Hampshire, this really the specific issue that's being litigated in just the colloquial sense in this the legislative battle is that school districts all around New Hampshire, even in conservative towns, have enacted policies saying that schools will socially transition children and will not only affirmatively conceal that from parents, but will lie to you about it if you ask them about it. They'll affirmatively lie to misrepresent what they're doing, and they say this. They just come right out and say this in their policies. There is no other area where parental rights are being so systematically, explicitly, openly violated. And so that's why Senate Bill 272 and why the Senate decided to address this head on by prohibiting that exact practice, by saying you can't affirmatively lie to conceal government facilitated, because schools are government entities. This is government facilitated social transitioning of parents' children. And of course, the pushback is always, well, if parents learn that their child is transgender, then they'll abuse them. And my response to that is that in literally every other area of law, before we take away parental rights or curtail parental rights, you have to have at least some small amount of specific evidence that the parent may have done something wrong, may be abusive. Even in the most permissive government procedure, you've got to have something.
Sure.
What you can't do is take away their rights by default and just presume automatically that all parents are guilty of abuse.
And don't you think any parent who heard that would, as a parent for me, that's just common sense.
Right.
And that makes sense, right? I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, not at all. No, I agree. I mean, it should be common sense. And I think it is common sense if you talk to people on the street.
Right.
In New Hampshire, but again, you have this culturally progressive domination of the institutions. And like any totalitarian movement, cultural progressivism wants to use government institutions to promote their cultural views among children. And for obvious reasons, they want to exclude, competing centers of power from that process, like parents, like families, like communities, like churches, and have this just singular domination of the process of raising and educating children by the state. And I think that's what we're seeing through these policies, and it's just going to keep going further and further in this direction unless there's pushback.
I know. And when the first, there was a bill, was it in March? The Parental Bill of Rights?
There was a previous similar bill,
okay.
HB 10.
Never did I think I would see the day that there would be parents marching outside in opposition of this bill. You're a parent, you have children in the school system, and you're in opposition of this bill. It's mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing, and I understand. I understand enough to understand why they might be opposing it. But here's the thing. You cannot affirm one group to marginalize another, and I think a lot of it is, protecting the trans group of children, but you know what? The parents are their parents and the guardians are their guardians. So that's just, in any other situation, that's how life works, right?
Right. I mean, our motto on this is parents should be innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely.
Right now, they're guilty until proven innocent. And, there have been multiple huge parental rights protests with people on our side of this issue showing up in Concord and making their voices heard. But unfortunately, what a lot of people don't realize, and this could affect, the outcome of this vote on Thursday, is since that time, the left has been much more organized and made a much more concerted, sustained effort to hone in on Republican reps who could potentially be swayed to oppose 272, to deluge them with often handwritten cards. I mean, these specific reps are getting Now, how this works is that the left will send out a list of 10 talking points, and they'll say, it's kind of like a build your own letter, like choose from these 10 talking points, write a handwritten letter, send it to representative boards or whomever, one of these Republicans we've identified as vulnerable, and just deluge them continuously. Meanwhile, you have conservatives who, because they did such a good job forming these huge protests, they think, well, our job is done. I made my voice heard. I'm going to live my life now. But the left doesn't think of themselves as not living their lives when they're doing political engagement. And I think that's Shannon McGinley, our executive director, was talking about this recently in the Union Leader, that's an unfortunate cultural difference, I think, that we should correct between the cultural left and the cultural right, is people on our side tend to think of themselves as, I'm just living my life, and maybe, I'll set aside some time on the side to do political and civic engagement, whereas the left sees that as integral to their lives, and so they do it continuously and in a sustained way. And ultimately in politics, the side who wants it more will win, even if they're a minority.
Well, it makes sense, right? The more you use the muscle, the more you train it, the better it's going to become. That's just common sense. And there was a time where, the Republican Party did do a lot more. And I always say to people, I talk about politics and I got involved, and, I still am involved, but it's important because you want to know who your policymakers are, because policy is going to affect everybody. And unfortunately, from my perspective, and I'm sure from a lot of people's perspectives, it's always the marginalized, the poor, the sick, and the homeless that are always getting further wronged by all of our doings. Does Michigan even have clean water yet? I know that's on a federal level, but and we talk about the Chicago shootings when it's election time, and has anything gotten fixed? What are we doing here? And I know I'm talking more on a federal level, but for people to really get involved, what are some of the things they can do? Like, what can they do on Thursday? They can sign the petition as well, right? Again, or I think the petition already happened. I don't know if it's going before the House, you said?
Well, there's still time to contact your state representatives. Okay. I can't emphasize enough, I'm sure this is all old news to your listeners, but because New Hampshire especially is such a representative state, you really can make a difference by contacting your state representative. I still think not enough people realize this, and we can do more to emphasize it, that I have seen repeatedly in years of doing policy advocacy as part of my work with Cornerstone, representatives change their minds because they hear from constituents. And we're a Christian organization. I think part of the cultural deficiency that on the right that I was describing is a theological deficiency, where the church has become more and more kind of disengaged from political and cultural issues. And in particular, if institutional church organizations and pastors were to become a bit more politically engaged, that can really be like a fulcrum in terms of the political difference it makes, because a state representative knows that a pastor speaks for many of their constituents if it's a pastor in their district. So if you can get a pastor to call a state representative, I have seen that multiple times really pay dividends.
Interesting.
So there's still a lot that people can do on this Bill 272 before the Thursday vote.
Okay, great. I know some people have just kind of, I don't want to say lose all hope, but some people are just, thinking, look at the system. What can I possibly do, or how will this make a difference, And that's really just what I try to do, is just educate people and just let them know that they can make a difference. And this is a great way, like you said, talk to their state rep, because we have a citizens legislature here for the people in New Hampshire. So that's super important. So that's this Thursday, May 18th? Yes, May 18th.
This coming Thursday.
Yes, this coming Thursday. Today's Monday, the 15th. Okay. And what else do we have on the docket as far as any victories that we've had in
Well, there was an attempt to destroy, again, the 6-month abortion prohibition.
Yes.
That was defeated in the Senate by a 14-10 party line vote. But multiple people have said to me, well, obviously that was a foregone conclusion. And no, the reality is that it was not. In the Senate, if you don't have enough Republicans to vote with the Democrats, then the Republicans will vote as a caucus. But people should not assume because we got a party line vote that there couldn't potentially have been enough Republicans to vote with the Democrats to pass this thing. And just look at the House. I mean, in the House, you had 16 Republicans, which is 8% of our GOP caucus, vote for a bill, House Bill 224, to legalize 100% unlimited abortion up to birth for any reason.
8%.
And 8% of the Republican caucus. And bear in mind that our law, again, it already has an exception for fetal anomalies incompatible with life. So the only thing these representatives were voting for is they were voting to allow the killing of a child who could survive outside the womb. These are viable children you could deliver. The day they're aborted, you could deliver them, and they would live. Those are the only babies that these Republican representatives voted to kill. And some of them ran as, a couple of them, or it was no secret their views on abortion, a couple of them. Many of them ran as conservatives. Many of them. Some of them ran as Christians, even. This has never happened in any U.S. state. Not even a blue state. Not even Massachusetts.
Wow.
Have you had anything like 8% of the Republican caucus in a legislature vote for unlimited abortion?
Wow.
So this is a controversy Cornerstone's been very involved in, because Cornerstone has been very aggressive towards these Republican representatives. And when people are uncomfortable with that aggressive rhetoric and identifying this as a really extreme, monstrous position and horrible thing these people did, I think part of what they need to understand is how bizarre this is, how this has never happened anywhere, that Republicans would vote for a position this terrible in these numbers. And we don't want to allow that to be normalized within the Republican Party. The status quo generally around most of the country is that if you're a centrist, middle-of-the-road Republican, you don't really care about this issue one way or the other, at least you'll say, yeah, late-term abortion, that's a bridge too far for me. I will prohibit late-term abortion.
Of course.
Charlie Baker, for example. Charlie Baker, when Massachusetts legalized unlimited abortion up to birth in December of 2020, they only did that over Charlie Baker's veto. Charlie Baker identified himself as a pro-choice moderate Republican. He said, late-term abortion, that's too much for me. I'm vetoing this. They overrode his veto. And yet, he left office as statistically the most popular governor in the United States.
As I didn't know that. You're kidding me.
Republican in a deep blue state, people loved him in Massachusetts. When he left office, they loved him.
Wow.
So, I mean, there is every reason politically that a Republican can support a centrist position on this issue and be a centrist. And that's historically been the norm, is that centrist Republicans would support centrist positions. What we're seeing in New Hampshire is this group of people, and many of them are affiliated with or want to align themselves with Governor Sununu, who want to normalize the idea that Republicans can vote for 100% unlimited abortion until a child's head crowns and still be Republicans in good standing.
My goodness. I just, wow.
And we can't allow that to be normalized.
No,
that could spill over.
That's just
to
not
other parts
normal.
of the
It's
country.
not normal, though. How can
it's
we
also,
allow that?
It's immorally monstrous.
It's
I mean, you have the position on abortion of Pol Pot at that point.
Exactly. It's, I don't know. I've had so many abortion discussions with people, with friends, and it always turns into the emotional, but what if, but 6 months, if you've been, violated or raped, that's, the provision is there. That's, there's really no need.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely a long time. It just turns into such an emotional argument, and I feel like a lot of that is what drives people to vote the way that they do, because they personalize it, or the left is very good at personalizing it and manipulating feelings and things like that. And I think it's a shame that 8% of the Republicans voted in line with that. I remember in 2019, we were just talking about this when we started the show, when New York lit up pink. Was it 2019, 2020? And That's
right. So that was part of that 2019-2020 wave I was talking about, with the Democratic states that used to have these 6-month abortion bans all legalized unlimited abortion up to birth. That was New York.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And you know what? If we're believing in science, which the left likes to do, right? And we all should, but in true science, and if we're going to talk about the age of viability, now with technology improving, science, technology, all of it, you can go to Boston, I've heard from many medical professionals, and the age of viability is even younger. than than it used to be, that a child could live outside of the womb. So with that said, I know that, Cornerstone does a great job advocating for, the rights of the rights that are right. I'm just going to say it. It's just common sense, things that people need to be more informed about. Unfortunately, a lot of money and promises might be going the other way to kind of entice people to vote in a way that will benefit them, not the greater good.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is...
Or in many cases, it's just misplaced fear. I mean, when you have millions of dollars being spent to sort of browbeat Republicans, the groups that are spending that money, they're never going to be friends with those Republicans.
Correct.
It's not like they're going to come around and support you when you
right.
grovel before them and do as they command.
Right.
And yet these people have this instinct that these people will leave them alone if they bow to them and cave. And the reality is they're just putting blood in the water. And they're showing weakness on this. Was the governor essentially guaranteed that the left was going to dig in its teeth and continue to push him on this and attack our law in New Hampshire when he started immediately wavering as soon as the law had been put into effect in New Hampshire, before it had even gone into effect. It was perfectly politically viable, and still is for him, I think, by the way, if he wants to reconsider his strategy, to just say, no, 60+% of my state continually says some limits on abortion they support. When this law is actually described to them, they consistently support it. I'm with the majority of the people of New Hampshire. I'm a middle-of-the-road governor, and I support this middle-of-the-road law. He should have just done that originally and stuck to it. We'd be in a different position today, and I think he should still do that now.
Well, he still has a chance to do that now. Any day, every day is an opportunity, right? I mean, to definitely come out and do that. It's just, wow, holy smokes. It's quite a time to be alive. And I think we can agree that abortion is never going to go away, sadly, in my opinion. However, I think that we, the people, the people that we talked about just walking here in the streets of Nashua, even New Hampshire, I think a lot of us agree pretty much the same on a lot of things. And I think the influence that we have, the pressure, the fear monger, right? The fear is even the fear of people pleasing. Well, I want to say this because, I don't want my friend to think of that. That's very real, around
So
grown
true.
adults, grown moms with kids. And we're trying to raise kids to be, morally upstanding, productive citizens in our society. And, one of the, my son is in a Christian homeschool co-op, and Classical Conversations. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's to know God and to make him known. And really, at the end of the day, what my husband and I say to both of our kids is that you can be anything you want. You have to work hard. You can be a neuroscientist. You can be a doctor. You can find the cure for cancer, for anything. You can be a trash collector. You can work at Dunkin' Donuts. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you know God and you make him known. If you don't know God, then there's really no point. And I'm going to stop there because I'm going in a totally different direction.
And making him known is not people pleasing.
That's correct.
I mean, I think that's especially a contemporary problem in the church, this obsession with agreeableness that you mentioned, that people are so fixated on. The only way they know of to manifest love is through agreeableness. And it's a distortion. It's a change from church history. Most of the successes of the church, of Christianity, from its inception to just centuries ago, were brought about through conflict.
Yes.
Through conflict that was disagreeable and often didn't please a lot of people. And it's only relatively recently that we have Vodi Bakum, a Christian pastor theologian, refers to the contemporary church has the 11th commandment, thou shalt be nice. And this has just sort of come up out of modernity and really reversed, I think, a lot of the trends of church history, where the church was willing to stand up assertively for the least of these and be zealous and to combat evil. And, in order for the church to really fully leverage the cultural power that we think that it still has today and could have, it first needs to kind of internally correct this recent
for
obsession
sure.
with agreeableness.
Yes, for sure. And, I grew up in the Lutheran Church, and then it went to the ELCA versus Missouri Synod, where
right.
we are here in Nashville. I grew up south of Boston, and it's just, the church that I grew up in is an affirming church and in a welcoming church, but you can't change what the Bible says just to make people feel better. The whole point is, can you get by? Sorry, we're just having technical difficulties here. People grow when they're uncomfortable. Like it or not, it's a necessary part of life, right? And the truth hurts. That's a saying for a reason, and I think it's so important. So what can people do as they, within their churches? You said that they can go and talk to their pastors, have their pastors contact a state representative. I think a lot of that connection is missing as well. People feeling like, because why would you go to a church? I don't know. We're running out of time here, and I'm not getting my thoughts here together. So
sure. Well, I'll just generally say I think people in their churches should talk about whether and why the church should be politically engaged and how. Why is it the church was much more politically engaged and culturally engaged in every period of its history until pretty recently? Why are we no longer that way? And what are maybe the biblical and historical reasons to be more politically engaged?
I have to tell you, you're a very bright young man. You speak very well. You articulate things very nicely. You're very knowledgeable. You're very smart. I'm excited to see what the future holds for you, and I'm really glad.
Thank you so much, Claudette. I appreciate that.
No, honestly.
I'm pretty beat today after a tiring last week, so that's especially encouraging.
No, you really are. I think New Hampshire is extremely, extremely fortunate to have you. You speak very well. And you can tell. You can tell. I know you're doing a great job, and I'm just very glad that New Hampshire has you, Cornerstone has you, and you're a representative here.
Well, thank you so much for everything you're doing. I've heard great things about the influence you're having with this show, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Yes, I would love that for sure. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. You're listening to Claudette Schmidt live on WSMN.live, WSMN 1590 AM, and WSMN 95.3 FM.
WSMN 1590, WSMN 95.3 FM Nashua. Listen, watch, and stream at WSMN.live.
USA News, I'm Rich Johnson. Pessimism from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on the debt ceiling talks going on at the staff level.
I still think it's far apart. It doesn't seem to be that they want it. There seems that they want to look like they're in a meeting, but they're not. They're not talking anything serious.
McCarthy says he thinks there needs to be a debt ceiling deal by this weekend in order to have time to get it through Congress. The Treasury Department says the USA could default on some debts as soon as the 1st of June, unless Congress raises the debt ceiling. Congressional leaders are scheduled to meet again with President Biden tomorrow at the White House. The number of people trying to cross the southern border since the expiration of Title 42 continues to drop, according to the Border Patrol. NBC's George Solis in El Paso says one big reason is uncertainty.
Many of them are now trying to understand the new rules for entry because many of them fear that if they are now